The baby came 2 hours before the auction. Eliza Monroe delivered her daughter alone in the holding pen behind the auction house, on a dirt floor that smelled like livestock and kerosene, with her wrists cuffed behind her back until the elderly woman in the adjacent pen begged the guard to show mercy. The guard unlocked one hand to catch a child coming into the world. Eliza bit down on a strip of leather to keep from screaming, because screaming attracted men, and men attracted cruelty, and cruelty was the only currency this place understood. The baby arrived in a rush of blood and agony and silence. No cry, not at first, just a small, wet body in Eliza's shaking hand, and a moment so still she thought the child was dead. Then a breath. A thin, furious wail that split the dark like a crack in a wall, and Eliza pulled her daughter against her chest and held on with the one free arm she had and whispered the only prayer she knew. Please, not this one too. 2 hours later they dragged her to the platform. Eliza could barely stand, but her mind was doing what her mother had taught it to do, recording. Her mother, Eliza Monroe, had been the one who taught her to memorize everything. They won't let us write, baby. They'll burn any paper we touch. So you put it in here. She'd pressed her finger to 12-year-old Eliza's temple. Names, dates, numbers, everything you see and hear. You make your mind into a book they can't take from you. Eliza Monroe had died when Eliza was 12, but the lesson had survived. So while blood soaked through her dress and shackles bit into her ankles and the baby pressed warm against her chest, Eliza memorized. The auctioneer's name, Harris, the handler, Roscoe, gap-toothed, smelled like chewing tobacco. 40 men in dark hats, the rain hitting the torches in a rhythm like fingers drumming on wood. The temperature of the air, the weight of her daughter. Everything went into the book inside her head, because the book was the one thing they could never put in chains. The auctioneer read her details the way a man reads a bill of sale for livestock. 24 years of age, strong constitution, recently delivered a healthy child, confirming her value as breeding stock. The child is not included in the sale. Mr. Pettigrew will retain ownership of the infant. Eliza's arms tightened around her daughter. She'd known this was coming. Knowing hadn't prepared her. Nothing could have. The bidding stalled at $95. Then a voice came from the back. Quiet, flat, carrying the way a stone carries when it drops into still water. 200. Silence. 250. The man was bidding against himself. 300. The hammer came down. Sold. Then the buyer walked forward, and Eliza saw his face. Mid-40s, weathered, deep, grey-blue eyes that looked at her, not through her, but at her, the way you look at something you recognize. Why is she in chains? He said to Roscoe. Remove them. All of them. The shackles fell. The iron hit the mud. 6 days of weight, gone. Then Roscoe reached for the baby. Mr. Pettigrew retains ownership of the infant. Eliza's whole body locked. She pressed her mouth to her daughter's forehead and breathed her in. Milk and blood and the smell of something brand new that hadn't learned the world was cruel yet. And whispered, Grace. Your name is Grace. I'm putting you in the book. Nobody can take you out of the book. The baby was pulled from her arms. Her arms were empty. The cold rushed in where warmth had been. Before we go any further, before you find out who this man is and what he's hiding, I need you to do something. Drop a comment right now with the exact time and your country. I want every time zone on this planet lighting up tonight. Hit subscribe, because every story on this channel is for the people who refused to accept the price someone else put on their name. Every single week. If that sounds like you, you're home. Now stay with me until the very last word, because what Eliza Monroe discovers about the man who bought her freedom will change everything you think you understand about this story. The wagon moved through the dark for hours. Eliza lay in the back on a canvas bedroll the stranger had laid out for her, staring at the ceiling and holding the shape of her daughter's weight in her empty arms like a phantom limb. The man, he'd said his name was Micah Croft, had cleaned and stitched her injuries with the impersonal efficiency of someone who'd treated wounds before. He'd given her water, bread, a blanket. He'd said rest in a voice that sounded like it came from a place beyond tiredness. She did not rest. She lay in the rocking dark and did what her mother had trained her to do. She recorded. Things I know. His name is Micah Croft. He paid $300. He removed the chains before we left the yard. He stitched me without looking at my face. He has not touched me. He has not explained. She held each fact in her mind like a stone in her palm, turning it, weighing it, looking for the crack that would reveal what was underneath. Men did not spend $300 without wanting something. The question was, what? Dawn came grey and cold. The landscape had changed from flat prairie to foothills. Eliza pushed herself up and looked through the canvas gap at Micah's back. Where are we going? My ranch, 2 days' ride north. Why did you buy me? He was quiet long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. Because my wife asked me to. Eliza went still. Your wife. She died 8 months ago. Before she died, she made me promise to go to that auction and buy the woman Pettigrew was selling. She knew my name. She knew your name. She knew Pettigrew. She knew what he was. How? Micah's hands tightened on the reins. Because my wife spent the last 10 years of her life running an escape network through this territory. She kept a journal, every name, every route, every person she helped or planned to help. Your name was on her list, Eliza. You were the last one. The wagon rolled forward. Eliza lay back down and turned this over in her mind the way her mother had taught her, slowly, from the edges inward. A dead woman she'd never met had known her name. A dead woman's husband had spent $300 to keep a deathbed promise. A dead woman's journal contained a list, and somewhere on that list, beside Eliza's name, might be information about Grace, where she'd been sold, to whom, whether the people who took her were kind or cruel, or something in between. Eliza's hands pressed against the canvas bedroll, and she felt the shape of a decision forming in her body before her mind caught up with it. She was going to find that journal. She was going to memorize every word. She was going to put it in the book inside her head where nobody could reach it. And then she was going to find her daughter. The ranch appeared on the second evening, solid timber, 2 chimneys, a barn built for lasting. Micah pulled the wagon up. There's something you need to know before we go inside, he said. I'm not alone here. From the porch, a figure emerged, small, thin, enormous, dark eyes, in a face that belonged to a child who had seen things no child should see. A girl, and the sight of her rearranged every assumption Eliza had made about what this place was, and who this man was, and what she'd walked into at the end of a 2-day ride through country that didn't care whether she survived it. Her name was Mercy. She was 7, maybe 8. Nobody knew exactly because the records of her birth had never existed. She stood in the doorway of the ranch house with both hands gripping the frame, wearing a dress 3 sizes too large that hung past her wrists and dragged in the dirt, and she watched the wagon the way a cornered animal watches an open door, wanting to trust the opening, but having learned what happens when you run toward things that look like safety. She was on my wife Ruth's list, Micah said quietly. I found her 4 months ago, hiding in an abandoned homestead 15 miles south, half-starved, alone. She'd been separated from her parents during an escape attempt. I've been trying to find them. He paused. She doesn't speak. Not a word since I brought her here. Eliza climbed down from the wagon slowly, her body still protesting every movement. She walked to the bottom of the porch steps and stopped. She did not climb up. She did not reach out. She stood below the girl's eye level and waited. My name is Eliza, she said. I'm not going to come up those steps until you're ready. Mercy studied her for a long time with those enormous dark eyes that held nothing except the calculation of whether this new adult was going to hurt her or not. Then her gaze dropped to Eliza's wrists, the raw red marks where the shackles had been. Something moved across the girl's face. Not a word, a flicker. Recognition. She'd seen marks like those before. She'd worn them herself. Mercy stepped back from the doorway. Not a retreat, an invitation. The space she left was just wide enough for one person to pass through. Eliza climbed the steps and went inside. Over the next few days, Eliza discovered that Mercy drew. Small charcoal sketches on the backs of feed bills, always the same subjects: mountains, horses, the barn, the view from the kitchen window. Safe things, the visible world. She drew with the focused intensity of a child who'd found the one language nobody could punish her for speaking, and she left the drawings in places Eliza would find them. On the table, on the porch rail, tucked under Eliza's pillow. Eliza pinned each one to the kitchen wall without comment, and she watched Mercy watch her do it, and something loosened in the girl's face by fractions so small you could only measure them if you'd been trained to notice everything, which Eliza had. On the fourth night, after Mercy fell asleep, Eliza searched the house. She found Ruth's journal on the third shelf of the bookcase in the parlor. Leather-bound, thick with entries, the handwriting small and precise and fierce. She sat at the kitchen table and opened it and began putting every word into the book inside her head. Names, dozens of them. Dates, routes, contacts, safe houses. A map of courage drawn in ink by a woman who had spent a decade moving people through territory that wanted them dead. On page 43 she found her own name. Eliza Monroe. Pettigrew estate. Priority. Pregnant. Due late summer. Must reach before the child is born. Ruth had been coming for her. Ruth had known about Grace before Grace existed. Ruth had died 8 months too early. Eliza pressed her hand flat against the page and breathed through the grief of being almost saved. Then she turned to the front of the journal, and on the first page, in Ruth's careful handwriting, she found a list with a different heading. People my husband returned, before he became the man I married. 12 names. The 7th name was Adina Monroe. Eliza didn't sleep. She sat with the journal open to that page until the lamp burned low, and the kitchen went dark, and the only light was the grey pre-dawn pressing through the window glass. Adina Monroe, her mother's name in the handwriting of a dead woman, on a list that documented the sins of the man sleeping 20 feet down the hall. Ruth had been meticulous. Dates, locations, amounts. The bounty on Adina Monroe had been $40. Micah Croft had collected it in the autumn of 1855 and returned Adina to the Pettigrew plantation, where she was beaten publicly and died the following winter. Eliza knew the truth because she'd been 12 years old and she'd held her mother's hand and felt the places where the bones hadn't healed right beneath the skin. $40. That was what her mother's capture had been worth to this man. Less than 1/7 of what he'd spent to buy Eliza's freedom 12 years later, as if arithmetic could undo what arithmetic had caused. She was sitting at the table with the journal closed when Micah came downstairs at dawn. He saw the book. He saw her face. He stopped in the doorway. Adina Monroe, Eliza said. Page 7. He didn't sit down. Yes. You brought her back to Pettigrew. You collected $40. Yes, she was my mother. Something moved across Micah Croft's face that she hadn't seen there before. Not the careful steadiness, not the flat competence, but something raw and old and so deeply carved it had become part of the architecture of his features. I know, he said. Ruth found the connection when she was building her list. Your mother's name on my ledger, your name on her rescue list, the woman I destroyed, and the daughter I was supposed to save. He braced his hand against the doorframe. Ruth spent 2 years trying to reconcile those things. She couldn't. She married me believing I could change, and I did change, but changing doesn't undo what you've already done. You should have told me, Eliza said, and her voice was the flattest, most controlled thing she'd ever produced, because the alternative was screaming, and she would not give this house her screaming. When? He asked. On the wagon, when you were bleeding and half dead? When would you have wanted to hear that the man who freed you is the same man who killed your mother? She wasn't killed. She was returned. No, there isn't a difference. I knew what would happen. Every bounty hunter knows. He sat down across from her. The table between them held the journal and 2 untouched cups of coffee, and the weight of 12 years and $40 and a mother's bones that hadn't healed right. Outside, Mercy appeared on the porch, watching through the window with those enormous dark eyes that missed nothing. Eliza looked at the girl, then at the man. I don't forgive you, she said. I know. I may never forgive you. I know that too. But those names in that journal, those people Ruth was trying to reach, they're still out there, and Pettigrew is still holding people in bondage 2 years after the law says he can't. She pulled the journal toward her. So here is what's going to happen, Micah Croft. You are going to help me finish your wife's work. Not because I've forgiven you. Because you owe a debt that doesn't have a number, and this is the only way to start paying it. They worked for 3 weeks. Eliza memorized every page of Ruth's journal, names, routes, dates, contacts, committing the entire network to the book inside her head. She cross-referenced Pettigrew's operation against territorial records. The pattern was damning. Illegal auctions in open violation of the 13th Amendment. Forged labor contracts. People held in bondage through debt structures designed to be unpayable. The same system that had consumed her father. The same system that had sold her 2 hours after giving birth. Mercy stayed close. She followed Eliza through the house and yard, never speaking, always watching. She drew in the mornings at the kitchen table, her usual subjects, the mountains, the horses, the barn. Safe things. Then one morning she set a drawing in front of Eliza that was not safe. Not safe at all. A woman with dark hair lying on a floor, holding a baby. Beside the woman, a second figure, standing, reaching for the child. The standing figure had light hair. Behind both of them, the outline of a building Eliza recognized from her memory. The holding pen behind the auction house. Eliza's hands went cold. Mercy had never drawn people before. Every previous sketch had been landscape, animal, building. This was testimony. Mercy, where did you see this? The girl pressed her hand against Eliza's arm, the first time she'd voluntarily touched another person since arriving. Then she pointed at the baby in the drawing. Eliza understood. Mercy had been at Pettigrew's. She'd seen Grace taken. On a Thursday morning, dust rose on the South Road. Not one rider. 6. Eliza saw it from the garden and ran for the house. Micah! Pettigrew rode at the head, florid, sweating, flanked by a county sheriff Eliza didn't recognize, and 4 men with flat eyes and deliberate posture. This was not a raid. This was a legal action, and legal actions were worse than raids because you couldn't shoot back at a badge. Mr. Croft, the sheriff said, I have a court order for the return of 2 persons currently in your possession. 1 Eliza Monroe, identified in the original bill of sale, and 1 unnamed female child, approximately 7 years of age, identified as property of the Pettigrew estate. Micah stepped forward. The sale was legal. I have the receipt, the witness statements, and filed manumission papers. The Territorial Court has not yet formally ratified the 13th Amendment for cases involving pre-war labor contracts, the sheriff said, and he didn't look comfortable saying it. Mr. Pettigrew's lawyer is arguing the sale falls under frontier property law, not federal statute. The manumission papers were filed under a territorial exemption that his counsel claims was improperly executed. The court has issued a temporary return order pending a full hearing in 1 week. Eliza stood on the porch with Mercy pressed against her hip. She could fight. She could take the rifle from above the door and make them come through lead to reach her. But Lead didn't stop court orders, and court orders were the weapon men like Pettigrew had always used, the law shaped like a fist, swung at people who couldn't swing back. "I'll go," Eliza said, "but you will not touch this child. I will carry her myself." She knelt and lifted Mercy, who weighed nothing because weeks of food hadn't undone months of starvation, and carried her down the steps and into the sheriff's wagon. She sat on the bench with the girl in her arms, and she did not look at Pettigrew because looking at him would mean acknowledging that he still had power. As the wagon pulled away, Mercy's hand found Eliza's collar and gripped it, and she pressed her mouth against Eliza's ear, and in a voice so small it was barely more than breath, the first sound she'd made in 4 months, she whispered a single word. "Grace." The hearing was held in the Harrow Creek Territorial Courthouse on a morning so bright the light through the windows seemed to interrogate everything it touched. Pettigrew sat at one table with a lawyer whose suit was too clean for frontier territory. The sheriff stood at the side. Eliza sat at the other table with no lawyer, no advocate, no one. Micah had been barred from the proceedings on Pettigrew's motion. She was alone. She had always been alone. The difference was that this time she had a weapon nobody could see. Judge Harlan, a lean man with spectacles and the careful expression of someone who understood that the law was only as good as the person reading it, opened the proceedings. "Mr. Pettigrew, you allege the sale was fraudulent." "Yes, Your Honor. Conducted under threat. Mr. Croft intimidated the auctioneer." "And you want the woman and the child returned?" "They are my property, Your Honor." Harlan looked at Eliza. "Miss Monroe, you have no counsel." "No, sir, but I have testimony. The court will hear it." Eliza stood. She felt every pair of eyes in the room land on her like hands. Her legs were not steady. Her voice, when it came, was not loud. But it was her mother's voice, the voice Adina Monroe had used to teach her daughter letters in the dark, the voice that had said, "Make your mind into a book they can't take from you," the voice that had been silenced 12 years ago by a man sitting 10 feet away, watching his world come apart. Eliza opened that book, and she began to read. She recited Ruth Croft's journal from memory. Every name, every date, every transaction, every person Pettigrew had sold in violation of the 13th Amendment since its ratification. She named the buyers. She named the prices. She named the locations of auctions held in the dark, in barns, in the same yard where she herself had been sold 2 hours after giving birth. She named 9 people currently held in bondage on the Pettigrew estate. People the law said were free. People whose freedom papers had never been filed because Pettigrew's lawyer made sure the paperwork disappeared. She spoke for 22 minutes without stopping, without notes, without looking away from the judge. Her mother had taught her to make her mind into a book. She was reading that book aloud in a courtroom, and every word was a nail driven into the coffin of a man who had believed that the people he owned couldn't read. The courtroom was silent when she finished. Pettigrew's lawyer was pale. Pettigrew himself had gone very still. The stillness of a man who has just understood that the woman he considered property had memorized the entire architecture of his operation and was now dismantling it with her voice. "These are serious allegations," Harlan said. "Can anyone corroborate them?" The door at the back of the courtroom opened. Micah Croft walked in. He walked past the sheriff, who moved to stop him, past Pettigrew's lawyer, who stood to object, straight to the front of the room. He stood there and said nothing for a long moment. The judge waited. The room waited. Eliza watched him make the decision in real time, watched his jaw tighten, watched his hands close at his sides, watched a man choosing to destroy himself because a dead woman had asked him to, and because the living woman in front of him had earned the right to hear it in public. Then he spoke. "I can corroborate everything she said, Your Honor. I can also provide the original journal. But before I do, the court needs to know who I am." He looked at Eliza. She met his eyes. She didn't nod. She didn't give permission. She just looked at him with the expression of a woman who had decided that truth was the only currency worth spending. "Before I married Ruth Croft," Micah said, "I was a bounty hunter. For 6 years I caught people who escaped from men like Augustus Pettigrew and returned them for payment. I returned 12 people. One of them was Eliza Monroe, this woman's mother." He pointed at Eliza. "Eliza Monroe was beaten after I returned her. She died the following winter. I collected $40. He set Ruth's journal on the judge's bench. "My wife spent 10 years building this record. Every name in that book is a person I helped put back in chains, or a person she helped set free. I am standing here because a dying woman made me promise to finish what she started, and because the woman at that table, whose mother I destroyed, is braver than any person in this room, including me." The judge took 3 hours. Eliza sat at the table with her hands folded, and her mind still holding every name and every number and every date she'd spoken aloud. And she waited the way enslaved people learn to wait, with the body still and the mind turning, and the heart prepared for either outcome, because hoping for one thing and receiving another was a wound she could not afford again. Pettigrew's lawyer objected 4 times. The judge overruled each one with decreasing patience. By the 3rd hour, Pettigrew had stopped looking at Eliza entirely. He was staring at the table in front of him with the expression of a man watching his own architecture collapse from the inside out. Then Judge Harlan spoke. Pettigrew's claim dismissed. Eliza Monroe declared legally free under the 13th Amendment, with immediate effect. Mercy declared free and placed in Eliza's guardianship pending location of her parents. Pettigrew arrested on 9 counts of illegal bondage. The sheriff who'd carried out the return order was suspended. Ruth Croft's journal entered into the territorial record as evidence. 9 people on the Pettigrew estate were freed by court order that same afternoon. 4 of them walked off the property carrying nothing but the clothes they wore and the names they'd been born with, which was everything. Micah's confession was entered into the record as well. The judge did not charge him. The statute of limitations had passed, and he'd testified voluntarily. But the confession was public now. Every person in Harrow Creek knew what Micah Croft had been before he became what Ruth had made him. The word spread the way words spread in small territories, completely, irreversibly, without mercy. Mercy's parents were found 3 weeks later, living under assumed names on a homestead 60 miles west. Ruth's journal had the contact. Micah rode out and brought them back. The reunion happened in the ranch yard on a morning when the first frost was on the grass, and the mountains were sharp against a sky so blue it looked painted. Mercy saw her mother step down from the wagon and made a sound. Not a word. Not yet. But something from below language, below memory, from the place where a child's body remembers the arms that held it before the world tore them away. She ran. Her mother caught her. They held each other in the frost, and Eliza stood on the porch, watching with tears running down her face and her arms empty and full at the same time. Empty of grace, full of knowing that because of Ruth's journal and Eliza's memory and a courtroom where she'd spoken truth until the walls had nothing left to hide behind, there were 9 more people standing in sunlight who hadn't stood there yesterday. That evening, after Mercy's parents had taken her home, after the girl had turned in the wagon and looked at Eliza and said, "Thank you," in a voice rusty from 4 months of silence, 2 words that contained everything a child can carry, Eliza sat on the porch alone. Micah found her there. He didn't sit beside her. He stood at the bottom of the steps, below her eye level, the way Eliza had stood below Mercy's eye level the first night. The way you stand when you're asking for access you haven't earned. "What happens now?" he asked. Eliza looked at the valley, the mountains going dark, the sky holding the last amber light, the ranch that Ruth had built and Micah had maintained, and Eliza had filled with something that felt less like survival and more like purpose. "I'm going to find Grace," she said. "Mercy saw the woman who took her. Ruth's journal has contacts east. Someone in that network knows where my daughter is. I'm going to find her, and I'm going to bring her home." "And me?" His voice was quiet, not asking for forgiveness, not expecting it, just asking what came next for a man who had destroyed and saved in equal measure and was standing at the bottom of the steps waiting to learn which weight the scale would settle on. Eliza looked at him for a long time. She thought about her mother whispering a bounty hunter's name with her last breath. "Remember who brought me back so somebody knows." She thought about Ruth's journal. A dead woman's act of love so enormous it had reached across death to keep a promise. She thought about $40 and $300 and the distance between those numbers, which was not a distance measured in money but in years and grief and the slow, agonizing work of becoming someone different than the person you were. "I'm not going to tell you I forgive you, Micah. I may not ever be able to say those words, but I am going to tell you this. Your wife believed you could become someone worth the breath she spent on you. She died believing that. And I am not going to let her be wrong." She came down the steps. She stood beside him, not touching, not forgiving, but present, together in the work that remained. "We start tomorrow," she said. "Grace first, then the others. Every name on both lists, yours and Ruth's. We find them. We finish it." The sky over Harrow Creek had gone the color of dark gold, the kind that isn't guaranteed, the kind that comes after the worst days and stays just long enough to remind you that the world is capable of beauty even when it has given you every reason to believe otherwise. Eliza Monroe stood in that light, free, furious, unfinished, and looked east toward the road her daughter had traveled, and she began. That's where Eliza Monroe's story ends tonight. But I need to hear from you before I let you go. Micah Croft caught Eliza's mother trying to escape and returned her for $40. Adina Monroe was beaten. She died the following winter. 12 years later, Micah's dying wife made him promise to buy Eliza's freedom, the daughter of the woman he helped destroy. He kept that promise. He testified against himself in open court. He confessed everything. And Eliza looked at him and said, "I'm not going to tell you I forgive you, but I'm not going to let your wife be wrong about you." Was she right? Can a man who did something that terrible ever pay it back? Is spending the rest of your life trying to undo the damage enough? Or does the original sin stay on the ledger no matter how many names you cross off? And here's the hardest question. Would you stand beside the man who destroyed your mother, if standing beside him was the only way to save the people still waiting to be found? Tell me. Drop your answer and your country and the time. I want this one to travel farther than any story I've ever told. And if you felt something tonight you weren't expecting, subscribe. Because next week, I'm bringing you a story that will break every rule you thought these stories followed. I'll see you then.